Welcome, everyone, to Salon number 72. Or is it 73?
Yeah.
Salon number 73, Gifting Values and Practices in the Female Divinities of Old Europe, Brigit of Ireland, and Ancient Italian Ancestresse, with Mary Condren from Ireland, Luciana Percovich from Italy. In the Maternal Gift Economy Breaking Through series, hosted by Genevieve Vaughan, and the International Feminists for the Gift Economy. We are very glad to have you join us today. I'm Letitia Layson, your moderator. So let me first introduce Mary Condren, who's calling in from Ireland. Thank you so much, Mary, for joining us today. Mary Condren is the director of Women's Spirit Ireland and a research fellow at the Center for Gender and Women's Studies in the School of Histories and Humanities at Trinity College, Dublin. Her critical work concerns the role of violence and the discourses of sacrifice in contemporary politics. Her constructive work focuses on recuperating the Indigenous female traditions of Old Europe and Ireland. She is an author of many articles and currently writing, I think, more books on Brigit. Welcome, Mary. Our second speaker, Luciana Percovich, welcome, Luciana, is calling in from Italy. She's an Italian nonfiction writer, a teacher, a translator, a director of series of books on women's history and spirituality. She was born in Gorizia, Italy, in an Italian-speaking family forced to leave at the end of World War II, with the cultural and geographical roots in Austria and Dalmatia. She spent her childhood and adolescence in Gorizia, attending classical studies. At the age of 18, she went to Milan to complete her education, and there she graduated in 1972. She has been defined as a traveler between worlds and a weaver of space-time connections for her ability of embracing distant, wide horizons with a loving insight. So welcome you both. And our first speaker is going to be Mary. Mary, I'm going to hand the mic over to you. Welcome. And we're just so excited for you to be here with us again.
Thank you. Thank you. So thank you all for coming today, and I'm looking forward to hearing your responses to what I'm about to present, because as usual, I'm usually down to the wire in putting the material together, even though I've worked on it for many years. So today I'm going to be speaking about Brigit, and part of my intention is to bring the traditions of Brigit into the Indigenous traditions of Old Europe, because, you know, Brigit of Ireland has many, many faces and many, many different levels, but it's also important to be able to discriminate between them so that we don't go into an old or a traditional form of religion, which can be very difficult, as we know, in these awful times in which we live, and that it might enable us to return to another way of being in the world, inspired by her stories and her traditions. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I will be happy to answer any questions and have any responses that you might want to make at the end of the presentation. Thank you. Okay, so in the maternal gift economy salons that I've been part of at the very beginning, we have learned a great deal from Indigenous societies, it's been a very sharp learning curve for me. We're already familiar with the work of Maria Gimbutas, who has inspired all of us in this work. We've also learned a great deal from matriarchal studies by Heide Gartner-Abendot, by Peggy Reeves-Sanday. And today we're going to explore the Indigenous roots of Old Ireland, particularly as they relate to Old Europe. Now, the sources for Brigit in the ancient Irish material are several. There's the lives of Saint Brigit, who is usually, she's usually considered to be a saint. There's the saga material where a female called Bri or Brigit appears, and some consider her to be a goddess. I'm going to look critically at that claim as we go along. And then there's the living traditions, her rituals, her material artifacts, the landscapes, where Brigit is not in the past, but she's an ever-present reality, a source of comfort, healing, solace, and inspiration. Now, everybody thinks that because Brigit is a goddess, she may come first. However, sad to relate, the lives of St. Brigit are actually the first written traditions on Brigit. They're followed by saga and other material that usually comes a bit later. And then the living traditions survive to the present day. And according to people like Mercy Eliade, rituals and material artifacts are in fact the oldest pieces of evidence we have of our ancient society. However, today I'm going to focus on the written texts. I tried to do everything all at once, but you'd be here for 5 hours if I did that. So I'm going to focus primarily on a very select number of written texts. And just to remind you that some of those texts are lost or untranslated. There have been many layers of colonization and invasion. They were written by very important dynasties and ecclesiastics. They were also very rich because most of them had a lot of slaves. And the people to whom Brigit is associated, the Futhard, were in fact already in slavery. However, we can learn a great deal from what I call the hostile witnesses to old Irish culture. So, for instance, in the 16th century, people were writing about the awful thing that the Irish Catholics were doing, and that's a great source of information about what they were actually up to. There are leaky documents where information can be found, and sometimes we have to read documents backwards, what Brigit did not do. So now the aim of all of this work is on the question of gifting. And of course, gifting is right through the lives of St. Brigit in the Bethu Brita, which has 33 paragraphs, something like 23 of them relate to gifting. But Brigit was no pushover. An unfortunate nun, one time somebody gave her a beautiful basket of apples. Brigit passed them on, the nun complained, and Brigit cursed her orchards. In contrast, another nun didn't object when she passed them on, so Brigit blessed her orchards and increased their fruitfulness. Like I said, she was no pushover. In another story of the lepers, she says that wealth must be continually circulated. 2 lepers came to Brigit and they asked to be healed. She healed the first one and then said to him, now go off now and heal your brother. And he said, I'm having nothing to do with him, that dirty old man. And so Brigit was exasperated. She reinfected the first leper and healed the second one. Of course, the moral of the story is that we need to keep our gifts totally in circulation. Now, the story that I like best out of all the stories, and I could have given you 33 of them or 23 at least from one document, in the lives of St. Brigit, she continually gives everything away. Now, when she was born, she was dragged from County Offaly up to Faughard in County Louth, on to Connaught. She was kicked out of Connaught, kicked out of Offaly, kicked out of County Louth, and she ended up in Munster and finally ended up back with her father, who had originally given her away to a poet. But now back with her father, she's in trouble again because she keeps giving things away. She can't bear the thought that some go hungry while she has plenty. And her father was totally exasperated and he decided, I'm going to sell her now to the king. So off he went and left Brigit in the chariot, and the father went in to have a word with the king, leaving his precious sword in the chariot. And then a hungry man came along, and Brigit, of course, had nothing else to give him but the sword, so she gave him the sword. And the king came out of the castle expecting that everything was just going to be grand, and the father was going to get his money, and the king was going to get his slave. But then they noticed that the sword was missing. And it says in the lives, her father wanted to kill her. But the king said, this daughter of yours is a great responsibility for me to buy and an even greater one for you to sell. In other words, she can neither be bought nor sold. She was a woman in her own right, an icon for women today, women who can neither be bought nor sold. And gifting was at the heart of all of that. So now, in the lives of Brigit, and I'm just summarizing this very quickly, abundance is stressed versus scarcity. In some stories, Brigit and Brendan are in conflict because Brendan went off seeking the land of promise, and Brigit lived in the land of plenty. And those two contrasts, the land of promise is where you have to accumulate and accumulate and accumulate, as opposed to the land of abundance, are very different. So there's, in the Brigit tradition, the focus is on regeneration, whereas in the traditions of Brendan, the focus is usually on redemption. And as we know, redemption has to come through the appointed clerics in the major religions. So now, where does this leave the indigenous traditions of Brigit? There are trace hauntings in all of the saga literature, the so-called secular literature relating to gifting. In the early Ireland, the kings were sacral kings, and their job was to ensure that communities stood in right relationship to the cosmos and to nature. And there was a very important piece of writing that talked about the taboos of the kings of Ireland. And these were the 3 commitments that they had to make if they were not going to be overthrown. No woman should ever die in childbirth. Fruit should always appear on the trees. Crops should be successful. Dyeing should also be successful because cloth played a hugely important role in early communities. And there's even some evidence that when the women were dyeing clothes, it was a magical art and men were not allowed next or near the places where they were doing it. So already in the taboos of the kings of Ireland, we can see the emphasis on regeneration and on abundance. The kings also had to find ways in which their legitimacy could be constantly expressed, but they derived their legitimacy not from holy books or from weapons, but by the extent to which their rule honored nature and the natural cycle and ensured the ongoing sustainability of their community. And for that reason, in many ways, the king entered into a symbolic sacred marriage with the goddess or female divinities of the land. Now, when I talk about the word goddess here, the land was the goddess was the land. I'm not talking about a personified figure, such as the likes that we see in Greek mythology. It's very different. And the ritual matings of the king and the goddess usually took place at what are now what we call the holy wells. And they had to swear on the elements. If the king had to, if the king ever made a false judgment, there was damage caused to the crops. And he also had to swear on the elements, on the sun, on the moon, and on the stars. So cosmology was at the heart of kingship in ancient Ireland. Now, it's often assumed that Brigit belonged to the people called the Tuatha De Danann. However, these days, people consider that the name Tuatha De Danann is actually very late, that the name did not arise until the 12th century, that should be. And it appears to have been formulated to distinguish the old Irish gods from the genuine Tuatha De. The word Tuatha means people, De means of God. Various attempts were made to associate Brigit with other international goddesses and rivers such as the Danube. And that was why they thought it was, Danann meant Danube. However, recent work is beginning to see that the word Danann actually means something very different. In the saga material, the name is designed to distinguish the old Irish gods from the new gods of Hebrews and Christians who came to Ireland and were called the sons of Mil. They came from Spain, the Milesians. So the legitimate Tuatha refers to the new Christian world order, while the Tuatha Danann is to be relegated, as we will see, below the ground. They are allowed out at the quarterly festivals, but generally they are the unconscious of the social order. They can be accessed generally through shamanic means, which are not the favorite occupation of the new Christian hierarchy. So the name Tuatha Danann is now contested, and there's an alternative which is much more relevant actually to the work that we're doing. Because it seems that the word Dan might also, well, actually it does mean gift in the wider sense of that word. For instance, in a famous saga, the god Lu wanted to enter the house of Tara, and he wasn't allowed in because every time he said, well, I can do this and I can do that and I can do the other, the guy at the door said, should we have all those already? But then Lu said, I actually have all of those arts, and he is because I am the Samel Danach, the man of all arts, or the man of all gifts. And for that reason, he was admitted into the hall of Tara and eventually became the king of the Tuatha, or even the Tuatha Danann, depending on which way you want to talk about it. Now, many texts in Ireland refer to three figures, sometimes female, sometimes male. And in Brigit's case, according to Cormac's glossary, her gifts were poetry, healing, and smith work. Wisdom is also sometimes called the son of the three gods of art. So in other words, the word Don refers to gifts, and they could be poetic, scientific, artistic, musical, spiritual, or theological. But the main thing is that the gifts had to be shared and used for the benefit of the community, wherever they came from or whatever kind of gift they might have been. So who were originally the TD? They were the earth spirits. They would be equivalent, say, for instance, to the breakdown that we have in Norse mythology between the Vanir, the Aesir, and the Disir. They would be more like the Disir. But they were made human and brought into the saga material only in order to be ridiculed and destroyed. So even apart from that, the ways in which they went about trying to destroy their reputation, as it were, reveal what I call trace hauntings of their value system. For instance, they're sometimes called the she, and the she is a word that means peace, because the Tuatha never liked iron. And according to James Mallory, who was a great friend and student of Maria Gimbutas, there were no weapons found in Ireland until after the many invasions. However, like the Greek Furies, who were defenders of the old matricentric system, when the sons of Mil arrived in Ireland representing the Hebrews and Christians, the TD were relegated to live below the earth, not above it. The sons of Mil lived above it and ruled from above the earth. So now the gifts are said to have come from several sources, and this, also is very interesting. They are the gifts of nature. They are the gifts that come from shamanic practices, such as praying over grave mounds, poetic inspiration, or psychedelic substances, or drumming. We can get gifts from meditation, or gifts come directly from God. Now, you can imagine that when the religion of empire, which I distinguish usually from the religions of the hearth, when the religion of empire came into being, only the gifts from God were considered to be legitimate. The others were relegated for all sorts of reasons. So the question then is, was Brigit a goddess? Or in what way can we talk about her being a goddess? And the only document that I have found in all of the documents that I have gone through in many years is this one from a 9th century document called Cormac's Glossary. And it says, Brigit is the poetess, daughter of Bedagda, This is Brigit, the female seer or woman of insight, Brigit, a goddess, whom Philly, which means poets, worshipped. For her protecting care was very great and very wonderful. So they call her the goddess of poets by this title. Her sisters were Brigit, woman of learning, Brigit, woman of smithwork, i.e. goddess, and Brigit of healing, i.e. three goddesses of the Dagda, from whom among all the Irish a goddess used to be called Brigit. Brigit then is Bro Sagat, a fiery arrow. Now, what are we to make of a document like this? Because actually further down in the same document, Cormac calls Brigit a saint. But from a feminist perspective, given that my training is in how to read these documents critically, what do we find? None of these Brigits have a mother. The mother is off the scene. And that is always a clue to what is going on. There are several references to the Dagda. In other words, Brigit is meant to be the daughter of the Dagda, but in many sources, she is also considered to be, according to the great scholar of these things, Tia Farahli, Brigit was originally his mother. But even worse, the Dagda, in some of the key texts relating to the demise of the Tuatha, the Dagda is ridiculed by using some of the attributes of generosity that would be ascribed to the Tuatha. He's ridiculed for his greed, and he also seldom appears in other manuscripts related to the Tuatha. So that piece, that very short little piece ascribing Brigit to being a goddess, is in itself a little problematic. So we find out a little bit more than that, more about that in a saga, which is little known outside Ireland, but which I consider to be one of the key texts of subjugation. And I've been struggling all week trying to figure out how can I present this, because it's a very complex saga. But it, on the one hand, indicates a matri-centered society where the women have decision-making power. And on the other, it also represents the overthrow, especially of that society, in favor of weapons. Now, in the first battle of Maitura, it's called, the text is called the Second Battle of Maitura because in the first battle, the sacral king Nuado was overthrown by having his arm cut off. And a sacral king can never rule because he's not a perfect male, as we kind of know these things in those times. Now, there was contention regarding the sovereignty of the men of Ireland between the Tuatha and their wives. Now, that's again a very interesting statement because, you know, generally speaking, in some of those ancient sagas, the wives would not have been consulted, but the wives were, in fact, the sovereignty goddesses of the land. And so they would have had to be consulted. And they said it would be appropriate for them to give the kingship to Bress, the son of Elatha, their own adopted son, and that giving him the kingship would knit the Fomorians' alliance with them. Now, just to explain a little bit, the Tuatha were the ancient gods of Ireland. The Fomorians were the dark creatures, as it were. They were the baddies in the whole world. But the women of Ireland, the wives, wanted to make peace. And, you know, I can give you reams more material about that, but I'll save it off for the moment. They wanted to make peace. So the idea was that one of them would marry Bress, who at that point belonged to the Fomori, and that would knit the two societies together, would knit the Fomorians' alliance with them. And so Brigit of the TD marries Bress of the Fomori, who are their traditional enemies. Now, when Bress then came to Ireland, of course, Bress went, and this is also very interesting, rather than Brigit having to go over to the Fomori, Bress had to come to Ireland, again indicating that this was a matri-centered, matrifocal kind of society. And he gave 7 guarantors from the warriors of Ireland, his maternal kinsmen, that if ever he broke his promises, that he would resign. And so his mother gave him land. Again, another signal that this is a matri-centered society. And he built a fortress built on the land. But immediately he begins to dishonor his promises through meanness and through greed. This is one famous occasion. A poet came and asked the king for hospitality. Now, in Old Ireland, hospitality, just as it was in the Hebrew tradition, was the ultimate ethic. And so the poet entered a narrow, black, dark little house, and there was neither fire nor furniture nor bedding in it. And 3 small cakes were brought to him on a little dish, and they were dry. The next day he arose, and he was not thankful. As he went across the yard, he said. Now, in Ireland, even up to this day, poets have extraordinary power. But in those days, if a poet satirized a king, effectively it could mean that the king's reign was over. So the poet went out into the yard, and this is what he said. Without food quickly on a dish, without cow's milk on which a calf grows, without a man's habitation after darkness remains, without paying a company of storytellers, let that be Bress's condition. In other words, let it be hungry and mean and dark and not ever having stories told to him again. He said Bress's prosperity no longer exists. And that was true because from that point on, he was blighted as a king. And that is the first satire that was made in Ireland. If only we could do the same today on another creature whom we will not mention for the moment. And so Bress goes even further, because even though now he's with the Tuatha Dé, he's still working on behalf of the Fomori. There was neither smoke from a house in Ireland, which was not under their tribute, and all the warriors of Ireland were reduced to serving Bress. He made the Dagda, who was supposedly his father-in-law, into making concrete around his fort. And it said neither service nor payment from the tribes continued, and the treasures of the tribe were not being given by the act of the whole tribe. And so Bress was deposed. He was deposed for meanness, and he had to take back to live with the Fomori. But once he got there, I just have to now summarize this very quickly. Once he got there, the Fomori were not happy about all of this because they knew that the Tuatha Dé lived very happily, that they had abundance, and they wanted what the Tuatha Dé had. And so a battle begins, and the Fomori enter the land of the Tuatha Dé, and the Tuatha Dé are using magical weapons, whereas the Fomori are using traditional weapons, but they get killed. The Fomori, if they get killed, they're dead. But when the TD warriors are hurt, they dip them in the well and they're grand again the following morning because they're fighting in a magical way. So the TD are winning. So the Fomori asked the son of Brigit and Bress to go to the TD and request one of their superior weapons. Now, while Brigit and Bress were together, they had a son, and the son was called Ruadan. And so Ruadan went to the TD asking for a traditional weapon. And of course, they can't ever refuse the request because he was a mother's son, and a mother's son was sacred in that tradition. And so they begin to make what Ruadan thinks is a weapon. And then he tries to use the weapon to kill the smith of the TD, which actually is his maternal uncle, Gobnu. Gobnu grabs the weapon and kills Ruadan. So in other words, the son of Brigit has been killed by a weapon made by the TD. So Brigit came and shrieked for her son. At first she shrieked, in the end she wept. And then for the first time, weeping and shrieking were heard in Ireland. And the writer says, now she is the Bree who invented a whistle for signaling at night. And that's again a very important thing because in many of the ancient texts, if a woman is being raped and has not been heard, cry out in protest, she's considered to have been guilty. And so Brigit invented the whistle. So if a woman going to the forest was being attacked, she could signal and get help. In other words, just in passing, the writer makes this comment. Now, the other thing is that keening and wailing were forbidden by the church at the time that the final version of the Second Battle of Matera was compiled. And so even as Brigit is screaming and wailing of her son, she's also breaking the laws of the Irish. So she's actually being ridiculed by the writer of that particular saga. But even more so, it appears that the weapon made for Ruadan was not a sword, but a weaver's beam. Now, again, I could spend the whole session on talking about a weaver's beam, but the weaver's beam seems to have been an instrument of authority. For instance, the Cailleach in Ireland, when she was going around, as it were, shaping the landscape, she carried a distaff, which also was probably a weaver's beam. But when a weaver's beam, the sacred instrument of authority, is used to kill somebody, a sacrilege has been committed. Nevertheless, the text goes on to say, so the spear was given to Ruadan by his maternal kin, and for that reason, a weaver's beam is still called the spear of the maternal kin in Ireland. Now, again, that's pretty important because the women, when they decided to marry into the Fomore, they were acting as peace weavers. And again, there's a lot of information in the text to show that women were, and Brigit in particular, was a peace weaver. And so her instrument has now been used to kill her son, and nothing but despair can happen at this point now. So the battle was won by the Tuatha, but they now realized their whole social system was completely overthrown. Not weaving, but weaponry would be the main force to be used in the future. And the Morrigan is the great queen, or sometimes translated as that, but she issues an ominous announcement about the end of the world as they had known it. She said every evil would occur, every disease, every vengeance. And then she chanted the poem, peace up to earth, heaven down to earth, earth beneath heaven, strength beneath, a cup very full of honey, mead in abundance, summer and winter, peace up to heaven. That was the world that she had known, but all of that had now changed. And she said, I shall not see a world that will be dear to me. I always cringe whenever I read this stuff because it's so ominous. I shall not see a world that will be dear to me. Summer without blossoms, cattle will be without milk, women without modesty, men without valor, conquest without a king, woods without mass, sea without produce. False judgments of old men, false precedents of lawyers, every man a betrayer, every son a reaver. The son will go to the bed of his father. The father will go to the bed of his son. Each his brother's brother-in-law. He shall not seek any woman outside his house. An evil time. Son will deceive his father. Daughter will deceive. So what are we to make of all of this? The Tuatha, as I said, were known to be the people of the gift, even though that's not the usual translation of that, but that's one of the things we have to continue to work on. The religions of the hearth, the Tuatha, are still alive, as it were, in Ireland in the living traditions, which I also call the religions of the hearth. And their traditions continue to be practiced by what some theorists call the lower orders. In other words, the quarterly festivals of Samhain, Imbolc, Bealtaine, and Lunasa. And some of you may know that in Ireland, 2 years ago, the government pronounced Imbolc, which is Brigit's feast day, to be a public holiday for the first time. We had tried to make that happen for many years, but finally succeeded 2 years ago. But in the religions of the heart, we're not dealing with what I call the religions of empire. We're talking about not worship, but alignment. Alignment with the cosmos, alignment with the community, and alignment with one's body. In other words, taking personal responsibility for the way in which one stands in the world. And those who practice the gifts, for instance, many healers, the TD were subjugated, not only because of their ethics, the economic ethics, but because of the way they sometimes obtained their information or their gifts. Many of them are shamanic. There's lots of information in the documents. They can travel to other worlds or to other dimensions of human experience or knowing. They cultivate acute intuition, communication, kinship consciousness, what Robin Kimmerer calls the language of animacy. And again, there's a great story between Brigit and Brendan, where he went out on the sea and he heard a little whale crying for help. And a little whale cried to Brigit and not to him. And Brendan was so furious. And he went to see Brigit and he says, how come the little whale called out to you and not to me? And she says, have you always kept your mind on God? And Brendan says, well, I'm a very, very busy man. Every 7 furrow, I think about God. And Brigit said, well, that's your problem, because from the time I first heard about God, I keep my mind on God and always have and always will. In other words, mindfulness rather than seeking great expeditions was the way of the TD. Brendan had gone off in search of the land of promise. Brigit still belonged to the land of plenty. And again, there are several texts which the female saints say to the mighty heroes, there's no point in going to Rome. If God is not inside you, you're not going to find him there. But in the New World Order, the gifts were going to be controlled by the religions of empire. They were the religions of the hearth were superseded by the religions of empire, and they were presided over by the higher orders. In other words, rather than natural gifts, the gifts that were to be offered were supernatural gifts, supernatural grace at the disposal of the priestly orders. And of course, we all know that they almost unilaterally exclude women from their precincts. And so not only women, but the ethics and values associated with the culture of the gift or the Tuhadei are excluded from the religions that currently rule the world. The hearth is replaced by altars of sacrifice. And of course, the altars of sacrifice lead inevitably into the sacrificial tribes and the sacrificial warriors who now trample the world in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Sudan, and in many other places, and Ukraine in particular. And in religions of empire, worship is now much more important than alignment. And the word worship, again, needs to be explained because it means, worship of God, okay, worship of the empire, worship of the nation, but primarily it means displaced responsibility. The individual can displace responsibility rather than being in alignment with the cosmos, with the body, and with the community. And there's a fundamental difference between the two kinds of society. Now, that's why it is so important in our work, whenever we appeal to goddesses, to distinguish between the indigenous divinities and the goddesses of empire who become ciphers of male power. In many cases, the mother goddess has become the sovereignty queen, legitimating the male rulers, as we can see, for instance, even in Ukraine, Brahanya is the goddess that legitimates that system. Their powers have often now been appropriated for political propaganda. This is one particular, and I think this is my final slide. Her wisdom, this is Garodo Krulik, who's a very famous scholar well, he's actually not all that famous. He should be a lot more famous than he is, but he has done a tremendous study of the Cailleach, who is the ancient Irish constructor of worlds. But he's talking here about a gift, a woman, a gift giver, a healer. And he says her wisdom and her healing powers have the nature of a gift, which she in turn as intermediary between human experience and the ancestral otherworld, is obliged to dispense as generously as the landscape itself dispenses its abundant herbal favors. She requires only to have her services requested of her by those who share an allegiance to the cosmological perspective in which the figures of the Kalyak goddess and the wise healer personify the gendered ancestral understanding of how the forces of the cosmos interact with human life and with the human imagination as it later expresses itself in cultural construction. I'm sorry, that's a long quotation, but what I'm trying to say there is that in the indigenous tradition of the Tuhadei, all of the gifts that are available to us, whatever they might happen to be, whether they're art or smithwork or healing, we need to recognize that they come from beyond us. They come from our ancestors. They come from the land. They are not ours. We are simply there to dispense them as best we can in our society.
Thank you so much, Mary. That was so fabulous and very full. I know the quotes that you gave us were so rich. Is it possible that you'll share the slides that we can put it up with this
Of course, that was the idea. That's why I thought, because it's a presentation is it's very short. So therefore, I wanted to put out the quotation so that people could go back to them later. By all means, of course.
Wonderful.
In the tradition of the gift economy.
Exactly. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, our next guest is Luciana Percovich.
Well, my presentation is absolutely different from Mary's because it's all images, and I will so made a fast introduction just through images that probably have not yet been seen because differently from other parts of Europe, such as in France, in Italy, prehistory, so-called prehistory, is just now coming to attention of archaeologists and paleontologists and so on. And so we are in work in progress. This first slide represents a good quantity of female statuettes from Neolithic and Paleolithic period. Next, I will spend some time on just 2 or 3 slides because they will illustrate the deep sense of my research, that is to understand what were the values that informed our ancestors and ancestresses, and they were so keen, they were so able to understand how cosmos law function that thanks to them we are here now and we can speak and live and search. So the deep sense of my research is that as another world has been possible, another world is or will be possible. And now I will stop a little bit on which were the values of this period. First of all, the situation of Italy is obviously completely in relation to the old Europe culture that Maria Gimbutas so-called, and referring to the Neolithic. But we can extend the term Old Europe at least as far back as to the Upper Paleolithic, because we find similar symbols, tools, materials, wall art, and burials in places thousands of kilometers apart. Secondly, ancient Italic ancestry traces show that the hunter-gatherer societies of the indigenous past shared a common vision as regards spirituality, behavioral patterns, values, and symbols present throughout the European continent. As for the adjective italic, I'm not sure that it is the right word to be used in English, because we in Italian distinguish between Italian and Italic, and Italic corresponds to the names of the peoples that partly were already living as indigenous in Italy, and partly arrived from east, north, east, and were the Kurgan population that were called I popoli italici. Anyway, I go on using this adjective that I have never since now found in literature, in English literature. Next, please. This set of values that we can trace back as to the Upper Paleolithic represent the alphabet of knowledge and values at the roots of the human symbolic world. The gift of life, the gift of food, rise from balance between human and natural resources, bringing forth the promise of abundance. So for me, the key concepts inspiring my research are these: that the human world contiguity with and dependence on nature were the basic knowledge they nurtured. And because they were conscious of human vulnerability among the gigantic forces of nature, gigantic animals with a body so without defense as the human body. So this deep consciousness of human vulnerability was the first comprehension that allows us to exist as species. Secondly, another key concept is the strong connection between human beings and the whole of nature. Now we speak of kingdoms, of separate kingdoms, while if we want to use this word, we have to speak in this case, referring to the past, to the permeability of kingdoms, which is at the basis of what was the first religious tradition, that of shamanism. The shaman is able to fly between worlds. Third, the circularity of time was linked to the cycles of life and death, to the movements in the sky and on the earth that were very attentively observed. So the notion of linear time that we are living in now is a very recent notion. For millennia and millennia, the time has been computed as cyclical time. And as the result of this conception of the presence of human in nature, we have that the search for balance in all its form give the gift of abundance as a result. And this we can find completely realized in the civilizations of the mothers. Next, please. This is just an image to show how the borders of Italy were different when we speak we think to the end of the last ice age, and the main names of the cultures that developed before the arrival of the Indo-European people. Next. I have divided this series of slides into four themes. The first one are caves, the second burials, then the Italian ancestresses, and finally the Italy goddesses, following the research of our Italian great I can have the right word, who studied completely for the first time. She was Momolina Marconi, the origins of pre-Roman religions and religions. So we have here just some examples of pictures or objects found in the caves. You can go on. This is from north. Also, the second one is coming from north. And as you can see, there are many human figurines that move themselves in space. Next. We are going now to the south of Italy, and we find also, as in the rest of Europe, many animals, in particular horses. Next, other images from the same Pugliese cave. Next. Always in the south of Italy, in Calabria, and then in the north, in Liguria, where we have the Caviglione cave. As you can see, they are very similar to other engravings that have been found all around Europe. Next. These are images coming from a cave in Sicily, the Adaura cave, probably a rite which was celebrated, a celebration of some feast or something similar. Next. Perhaps the most intriguing figurines that have been found depicted on a cave. They are found here in the Grotto del Genovese, also on a small island nearby Sicily and belong to the Upper Paleolithic. And next, they are all more details from the same cave. And next, different in time, because here we are in the Neolithic period, but we have a most wonderful Grotta dei Cervi in Puglia, di Porto Badisco, where you can see the same type of figurines have been painted on the walls of the cave. Next. Let us go now to consider the main burials that have been found in Italy. They are four. Two are in the north and exactly in Liguria, and two are in the southeastern part of Italy. Next. Ecco, here we have the first two on the left are found in Liguria in two different sites. The first one is called Arene Candide, the second is Caviglione. And while the second has been proved to be a female from the DNA analysis, for the first, the so-called Prince of Arene Candide, it doesn't exist any DNA analysis, but what we have found in particular around her head, that is the shells that constituted the hairdress of the buried person make us think that it was also a female, because this kind of hairdress were reserved to women. So we have two dames in the north and two dames in the south. The third one is Delia, the mother of Ustuni. I will return on air just now with the next slide. And the fourth is the woman of Parigi found in Puglia. Next, yeah, please. Delia, the name which has been given to this woman, was pregnant. The skeletons of a woman buried between 20,000 and 20,000 years ago, with the baby she was carrying, were discovered in a cave that now is called Santa Maria d'Agnano in Ostuni. And the cave is one of those sacred places that began to be frequented and celebrated with various and probably with other kind of ceremonies, because of their being since the origin sacred places, and the frequentation that continued over the millennia made of this place a place of worship even in the Christian era. So blissful place where to sleep and where to celebrate life. Next, now we have the Italian ancestresses, both Paleolithic and Neolithic. These, as you can see from this map, is where they are situated. Let us begin with the next slide with the Paleolithic ladies. These are the main statuettes that have been found in the localities on the previous map. We go from north to south, and let's go on. Here you say better, two of the most magnificent statuettes of the Paleolithic ladies. The first one is in Emilia-Romagna, and the second one, which is less known probably, is a small statuette. As you can see, that they have its dimension from the hand. It's of a green stone, and she has been defined as a frog goddess, because her legs are probably those of a frog. And in fact, in the Pana del Diavolo, how is called the place where it has been found, there are also warm waters flowing out of the cave, and in this cave live still frogs that with the forms depicted on their skin resemble clearly this small statuette, which we can call Lady Frog of Cardano. Let's go on. Other images of Balzi Rossi. In this case, they are compared with similar ones found in Malta, in Siberia. Let's go on. Next. Here we have also in evidence this particular of the hairdress that covered very often the faces of Paleolithic figures. These belong to southern Italy. Next. And here we are at the end of the Paleolithic with, in particular, the pebble of Tolentino, dated about 14,000 years ago, which represents, it's a small pebble on which this wonderful, fantastic figure is impressed. As you can see, she has a female body, while her head is that of an animal. That hybrid, which was so frequent before Greeks decided that humanity had to choose between being human or being beasts. And the other one is a simple painted pebble, which belongs to the region of Abruzzi. Next. Here we have the Neolithic statuettes. These two manifestos have been made by a colleague of mine, with whom and with Alessandra and Elvira. We three have opened the site Preistoria in Italia.it, which can be consulted and also in English, and that by which we are trying to diffuse and to stimulate more research in Italy on the prehistoric period. Next, some examples of figurines belonging to this Neolithic period. Here we are in Puglia, where there are these wonderful stones, impressed stones. Then next, the probably more famous statuette of Gaban, which is in the north, in Trento. It dates back to the early Neolithic period between the 6th and the 5th millennium. It's a very peculiar fall. It has a very peculiar fall. Let's go on. This is a statuette found in a female burial from the mid-5th millennium, and and she is a sort of sitting goddess. Next, this is another famous Italian goddess, the double goddess of Piedina, always to the 5th millennium. Next. Other images. Next. Then we have also beginning from or since 3,000 years ago, a vast presence of stele or menhir, both in Tuscany and in the Alpine, or in the zone of the Alps. They represent both women and men. Let's go on. Another example. Then next, here we have the first two statuettes are coming from the already quoted site of Liguria Arene Candide. They have earthwork terracotta, Neolithic terracotta. The other two on the right are two other examples of stele. Next, I finished this rapid running through Italian prehistoric sites with Sardinia, which is so dense of sites that I really think that everybody should be delighted to have a visit in Sardinia. This, in particular, is the entrance of one of the myriad sacred pits that can be found everywhere from north to south of Sardinia. Next, two examples of what are these sites. This one is in the south of Sardinia. It's called Montestu, and is high on the sea, and has been found places where frequented by living, but also as used as also as burials. The next one is a little bit more north. Is called Pranum Muteddu, and here you have also many examples of menhirs. Let's go on with the next. And this is one of the best examples of the Domus Deianas, which are Domus Deianas means the fairy houses, which are also very frequent in all Sardinia, whose use request much discussion about. Anyway, they are wonderfully painted with, as in this case, red ochre and spirals. Next, these are examples of figurines coming from Sardinia. The first one is the oldest of Sardinia, a Paleolithic statuette with the head of I don't have now the word, anyway, a rabbit, a wild rabbit. The typical Neolithic sitting goddess of Sardinia. And the third one, it belongs to a much recent period, which is the Bronze Age. In fact, the next slide presents you an example of the myriad of bronze people that have been found in Sardinia. So with this, we can go to the next and introduce the fourth part of my presentation, which is the one that perhaps is more interesting because it speaks about some Italian, or better, Italic goddesses with their names and their functions. The author of this research, Momolina Marconi, was not an archaeologist, but she had a formation in literature, and she was a deep reader of all the information that could be found in the literary text. Two are her main books, Riflessi mediterranei nella più antica religione laziale, published already in 1939, and more recently a collection of her lessons and writings called the Circe Morgana Scritti di Momolina Marconi. Let's go on. I will try to summarize her reading of ancient history. First of all, she uses always the term Potnia, which is a term already a Greek term, but a term which Greek means Indo-European language, a term that probably is translated into Greek the concept that later corresponds or was covered by the term goddess, which did not belong to the indigenous conception of what is sacred, nor to the language of the indigenous people. Anyway, it is a word that means she who can. That is completely different from the term goddess, god, or goddess. Well, Marconi emphasizes a unitary female deity throughout the Mediterranean area, with different names but common characteristics. And she identifies her more recurrent forms that are the naked goddess, the goddess showing her breasts, the goddess who holds or breastfeeds, the bird goddess, the serpent goddess, the dove goddess, the Potnia, goddess of plants and animals in particular, and the oldest, evidently, the Luciferous goddess, that is she who brings life. In the Italic and late in pre-Roman Greek religion, she finds the names and more defined functions for the following female deities: Fortuna, Bonadea, Mater Matuta, Peronia Indiana. Other autochthonous deities were Angitia, Marica, and Raetia, but Momolina doesn't describe them. Finally, she traces a close connection with the great Mediterranean Potnia and the figurines of the most famous Middle Ages priestesses or mages. So she thinks that between Circe and Medea, there is a line of continuity that brings to Morgana and the Lady of the Lake. Well, let us observe a little bit the deities, the Potnia. I have given you just the names. Go on, next. So we have, first of all, Fortuna. Fortuna was a very popular lady because she was a great protector of human fertility and childbirth. But she was the giver of gifts that were represented in the cornucopia, or a word means plenty of gifts, always full of flowers and fruits. So the term Fortuna was probably linked to Fortuna means luck, but Fortuna has also in its root the term fate, sorte in Italiano, that is linked with the concept that if you follow the laws of nature, what you can obtain will be generosity, will be abundance, will be richness of fruit, and so on. So Fortuna, also for her name, or more than for her representation, can be considered the heir of that view whose roots are in the deep Paleolithic times. The next one is Bonadea, which means good goddess. She was in particular more oriented to plants and animals as a dispenser of health and well-being. Also this in continuity from the Paleolithic women gatherers a long-lasting tradition that ended, but was not completely interrupted with the witches and the burning times, in which they were eliminated, or they tried to do so. For Bonadea, we have an herbarium or Hortus conclusum that was grown by her priestesses, and wine was offered on her altar. Her cult was in the open air, in a grove surrounded by stones and containing a source of water, a kiosk with herbage, and a small house. Serpents lived in her temples, and Faunus was her paredro. She was next. Mater Metusa, which means the mother of the morning hour, that is the first light that creatures see coming out of the womb of their mother, or coming out of the darkness of the night. She was worshipped in the center of Italy, and she underlines the characteristics of the healer and of she who takes care of children and nurtures them. In her sacred places have been found many votive offerings in terracotta representing fruit, flowers, animals, and body parts to indicate her protective and healing functions. The votive parts, the body votive parts in terracotta are breasts, arms, legs, feet, thighs, masks, baby figurines, and even animal toes. Then we have at last, in the next slide, Feronia. No, it's not the last. We have also Feronia is instead more linked with the ferocious and wild animal life of the, but also of the plants and of the medicinal herbs, who preserves intact all the characteristics of the ancient Mediterranean Poppia. So she is perhaps among the Italian Potnie the most linked to the original characteristics of these she who can. The Latin root fer also indicates a pregnant female. So we have also always this characteristic of taking care, giving life, giving food, giving health. Feronia in particular is a sacred Virgo not subject to marriage bonds, but accompanied by her paredro Picus, the sacred woodpecker, bearer of both the celestial fire connected to the fertile energy, but also he is able to bring Feronia where healing plants grow. And this characteristic is also common with Diana in the next slide. Diana in Italiano, her cult was essentially Sylvester. She is the queen of the sacred forest. As Diana Lucina, she is the goddess of the clearing in the wood, the primordial abode of the deity. As Diana Lucifera, she brings the torches that illuminate the night in the night, the forest, the animal and vegetal creatures she protects. She is also the lady of the lake, the lady of the trees, the erected stones, of the pillars, and of the sacred enclosures of the where medicinal plants are grown. Later on, she was associated with Bonadea when from wildlife, cultivated fields and farm animals were the source of food. She had also more than one paredro. Virbio, who is the young green man, from the root of her name, derives verga and verbena, which are respectively the sacred branch and the sacred grass, while Silvano is the wild man, the adult, the old wild man, adult or old custodian of the horses of the goddess. And also Picus appeared as her paredus. The connoisseur, he knows where the healthy herbs and especially the secret place where peonies blossom. And with this short going through this continuity between the values of the first clan societies and the already organized society of the Roman, pre-Roman Roman world, I think that this has resulted as a clear topic that preserves the female tradition and the female values of connection of all the living creatures. And this last image is an Etruscan era Giunone that with her expression seems to me, looking from her past, telling us that we have to resist amidst things that we really don't like and don't correspond to our sense of life, waiting for a different world that will be possible again. And with this is all. I still recall you that if you want to have more detailed information, this is the address, restoriinitalia.it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Luciana. That was beautiful. And you're right. I think we haven't seen some of those images, but more importantly, the perspective. And Mary also brought this out, the indigenous perspective of what you identify as ancestresses, that in the greater goddess community identify as goddesses. And Mary, you did such a beautiful job of identifying why you have chosen to use the word ancestress as opposed to, and female divinities as opposed to goddess, because of the cipher that you expressed. It's very, very important, very clear, and so beautiful. Thank you both. Now, Mary, did you want to say anything or have any questions for Luciana before we actually, before I check with Liliana and Judith?
No, I was just enjoying the images so much and reflecting on the fact that we have so few of them in Ireland, because either because they were erased or because the Ice Age wiped them all out 9,000 years ago. I don't really know. But we have very few images of goddesses as such, but also because I think we Irish are very poetic. We're reluctant to pin things down, you know. I remember my mother, who was not well educated, but sometimes she would see and she'd say, I wish they hadn't put the face on that figure, because she wanted to put her own face. She wanted to have her own understanding as to what that figure meant. It was okay for the rest of the body, but not the face. So so thank you, Luciana. Absolutely a fascinating presentation. And I hope too that you will be able to put that on the website, because it requires, you know, it would be a real gift for us to be able to review it again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes, Luciana. So we will put your PDF up with the recording. Is that okay with you?
Sorry?
Can we put the PDF that you sent us up with the
Yeah,
recordings? Oh,
yeah,
wonderful.
yeah, you can. You can,
Wonderful.
please.
Okay. Excellent. So let me check in with Liliana and Judith. Let's go to Liliana first with our first question. We have a bit of time. We have about 25 minutes for questions.
Yeah, there's a question from Catherine Lobard, and she says, for Mary, any thoughts of why at this time Brigit is recognized as a holiday by the Irish government? And thank you for your scholarship.
Well, there are many reasons why, but Catherine, as you well know, because Catherine lived in Ireland for some time and was a great help to us in the early days of Women's Spirit Ireland. And I really miss you, Catherine. I wish you could come back from foreign lands. But anyway, I think, as you know, we've been celebrating the festivals of Brigid, and next year in 2025 will be the 30th anniversary when Women's Spirit started to do the festivals. And every time we have produced study resources, and we've written articles, and we've put out a lot of stuff, so that when the call came for Brigid to be a public holiday, I think the government couldn't really say no this time, because for many years they had said no. Because I just came across in my archives the National Women's Council in 1991, I think they asked that Brigid's holiday be a public holiday, Brigid's Day be a public holiday, and the government ignored them. But it's also because of the demise of traditional religions, and the Roman Catholic Church has been under great pressure over the last few years because of its sexism, its misogyny, and some of the abuse. And people are looking for something. The problem I see, though, is that Paddy's Day might become a Biddy's Day, and that the wealth and the ethics and the values of Brigid and the gifting would be lost in the enthusiasm to make Brigid a public holiday. I mean, it was great last year. We had a great time last year when Brigid was a public holiday. She was everywhere on the streets. But now we need to put more flesh on the bones. So hopefully our next Brigid Festival will be on Brigid as Peace Weaver in the end of January. So that will also be a contribution towards that.
Thank you, Mary. Judith, did you have a question for us?
I have a couple of comments first. What Mary just said about her mother wishing the statues didn't have any faces, and in all of the discussions of the Neolithic goddesses, I've never seen that as an explanation of why they don't have any faces, because the facial detail in the Neolithic figurines is generally pretty sparse. So thank you for that. Thank you also for your story about Brigid and the apples. I remember many years ago, I had a friend who owned an apple orchard, and he gave me 2 bottles of homemade apple cider, and I gave one of them to a dying man. And I told him that. I thought he'd be pleased, and he wasn't. He was furious. He said, I gave that to you for you to enjoy, not for you to give away. And that totally floored me, and comes to mind with some frequency when I think about giving away something that someone has given me. The third thing is, I recently made a presentation on the biblical Sarah. And according to the work of Sabina Teubel, she says, hi Jen, she says that Sarah lived at a time when society was changing from matriarchal to patriarchal, and that Sarah was actually engaging in the Heros Gamos ritual with the foreign kings as a priestess of the goddess. And so it was interesting to see the parallels between what you talked about, Brigit and Herod's Gamos and the fertility of the land. And so the question is, can you say anything about the parallels between the figures that you've been talking about, the goddesses or priestesses or whatever name you put to them, and the Middle Eastern biblical Israelite traditions?
Well, a lot of I said at the very beginning that a lot of the written materials in Ireland were compiled in the monasteries. And the monasteries were owned by families. And it took a long, long time before a diocesan structure could be set up in Ireland. So the monasteries were also centers of learning, and they depended very heavily on the Hebrew Bible. And so many of the stories, and Sabina Tubal has brought that out very beautifully in her work on the matri-centered origins of the Hebrew tradition. Many of the stories have come into the Irish, and it's unfortunately, when I read, as I do, reams of Irish scholarship, it does, even though they might acknowledge that there were stories coming in from other cultures, they don't really address them from a gender perspective and look at the matri-centered nature. And in fact, that's considered, when I do it, I'm considered to be a crazy woman, but that doesn't bother me. Being a crazy woman is what is needed in this day and age with the crazy people that are ruling the world and intend to continue ruling the world. So there are lots of parallels, but I haven't seen any work that directly corresponds with the matri-centered emphasis in the Irish and in the Hebrew traditions.
Thank you, Mary. Luciana, there's a quick question I'd like to ask. Are you still teaching, Luciana?
I am no more teaching as a teacher in school since 10 or more years now, 15 maybe. But I go on teaching in women's organizations, such as the Free Women University in Milano, such as the Tempio della Dea, the Temple of the Goddess in Torino, and also through the two websites that we have opened with friends. I am in a sort of full immersion for the last 20 years in prehistory. And this is the subject, my preferred subject in teaching. There are some points that I have written in my books, and then that I continue to speak about. One of these is the use of the term God and Goddess. We know that, especially after the advent of the God of the Bible, the unique, without a body, but still sex-rated as a male. The term God is so full of all these automatic meaning that we attribute to it, that using it in al femminile, at the feminine, and brings a completely wrong idea of what we intend both for sacred instead of divine, and of and with the fact that we practice the sacred dimension in everyday life, and each of us is doing so, while the idea of religion is completely aligned with the values of incorporating. Anyway, it's very difficult for me, as you can obviously see and listen, to express correctly myself in English, because there are I never have in the last 10 years the occasion to continue to use this language. I'm able to read, to write, but not to speak. So I do apologize for my inefficiency in using your wonderful language. And this is the reason why I think it's better, if you want more information about how the research is going on in Italy, to access the site where also an English version is at disposal.
Thank you, Luciana. Your English is very good, by the way. And if you haven't had much time for practice in the last 10 years, it just inspires us to invite you more so you have practice. This is where you can practice speaking your English. So, okay, thank you so much. Mary, did you have any comments that you might want to add to what Luciana was saying about the use of the word God and goddess again?
I think that was what I was getting at too, that you know, in the initial stages of looking at you know, finding ways for women to speak with some integrity about divinity, we did start using, you know, images and language that replicated the patriarchal understanding of divinity. And I think that's all beginning to change. You know, like when the Brigit holiday came up, I was interviewed on Irish radio and I was asked, why do I use the word indigenous rather than pagan? Why do I? And there are many words that we have just changed. You know, why do we use the word hearth rather than altar? Why do we use the word alignment rather than worship? And I think that's the thing we need to keep thinking about that. And so I prefer to use the word divinity now than gods, because that's there's a way in which the written traditions are petrified. They are stuck in stone. And if we're going to get to a point where people start taking responsibility for their own lives, then, as Luciana has just said, that's to do with the practices, the everyday practices of the hearth space in the house, rather than in the temples, from which women have been largely excluded as officiants for thousands and thousands of years. So why should we, you know, why do we as Audre Lorde said, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. So we have to find tools of our own and language of our own that makes sense.
Thanks, Mary. Yes, it's in alignment. I host, I'm a moderator for a panel of Indigenous women at a conference that has had 3 of them, called She of Many Colors. And it's Indigenous women speaking about the deities of their culture that we in the mainstream goddess community call goddesses. And I wanted the women to be able to hear, as both you and Mary, as you, Mary, and Luciana are doing, as Indigenous women on your original land, you speak of these divinities or these female deities as ancestresses, that it's important that they're connected to the land and the cosmos as a direct lineage, which is quite different than the concept of goddess that flips the mind into a place of what you would say, Mary, worship as a difference of relationship. So it's so beautiful. Thank you for that. Let me just check.
Can I just say in
Yes.
relation to that I know Joan Marler is on the call, and she has continued
Yes.
Maria Gimbutas. And we've had conversations about that. And she's always told me that Maria was not altogether comfortable with the titles that were put on her books of goddess this and goddess the other, but they sold a lot of books. But in her language, and she says this in several of her works, she does talk about divinity, being immersed in the landscape and in the animals and different representations of divinity. And she would not have been happy either with petrified images of goddesses.
Thank you. Let's check in with Liliana and see. We have a few more minutes, probably another 10 minutes for some questions. So Liliana?
I have a question for Mary from John Marler. Thank you, Mary, for your profoundly important presentation. Maria Gimbutas wrote about the earliest development of smith work that appeared in all Europe for sacred purposes with no creation of weapons. Would you say that smithing in Ireland was linked with women's mysteries? If so, how? I can repeat the question.
No, I understand the question. That's okay. I read it on the Q&A. The question of women and smith work in Ireland is complex. There has been a huge growth in Ireland over the past 30 years of shamanism, but I don't necessarily use the word smith work in relation to it. But there is a story in the lives of Brigit where it starts off by saying, one day Brigit was at her forge. Now, you know, again, the scholars don't necessarily comment on that, but when I see Brigit was at her forge, what on earth was she at? But her bishop came along looking for his garments, and she had given them all away because she gives him everything to the poor. She had no garments left to give him. And so she finally gave him the garment of a sealskin. And you know, and he was furious, and he started to go out, and Brigit said to him, well, if you're going to Rome, you won't get there. And anyway, to go to Rome, much labor, little profit. If the God is not within you, you won't get him in Rome. And as soon as he went out, the wolves ate him up. Now, so her bishop was killed. But the interesting thing about this is the garment of a sealskin is what the shamans used to wear. And another saint, Menena, who was related to Brigit, she was buried in her badger skin. So there is a sense in which the smith work is shamanic work, I would imagine. But I don't know a great deal about that. You'd really have to talk to somebody who, you know, has engaged in shamanism, because I haven't, at least not directly. So I hope that answers it for the moment. Yeah.
Thank you, Mary. Liliana, could you read Joan's other question for Luciana?
Yes. Thank you,
Slowly.
Luciana. Thank you, Luciana, for your presentation, for including the continuity of Paleolithic imagery for millennia into Neolithic Europe. Did you get that, Luciana?
Yeah.
Okay. On another note, please say more about the Domus de Janus sanctuaries, the extent of their physical and location and use over time. Also, please tell us your interpretation of their use. Should I repeat it? I can.
No, I have understood, but it's not so easy to answer.
Okay, that's okay.
If I could speak in Italian, it would be better. Anyway, probably these Domus de Janus were places of burials, probably. But sometimes they have also been places of living, for the living, and in some cases also places where to collect water, as it's very visible visiting some of these places. Janus in Italiano means fata, And Fata are all the fairy creatures of which the British Isles and Ireland are also disseminated. And they allude to, when used in more recent times, to places where women found refuge and where to go on continuing in their own way of life and tradition. That means that as in for the Privapete, for example, in the north of Italy, and as for the most better known, the Baba Yagas, these figures that live on the border on the edge, between the civilized, already patriarchal world and the natural world. All these places were places of resistance. And the Llanas, in the tradition of Sardinia, represent both the people who first inhabited the island, but also the place where women in particular resisted to the coming of the Romans, of the Phoenicians, of all the populations that the Egyptians and so on, all the Mediterranean people who tried to colonize Sardinia. So these Janas are a sort of fairy enchanted people which still survives in the local festival and traditions.
Thank you, Luciana.
I hope I have answered.
Absolutely.
Great.
We are, yes, thank you. We are almost at the top of the hour, so I'm wondering if Mary and Luciana, you might have some closing words, and I'll just close us out after you. So, Mary, would you like to say something in closing? Thank you so much, by the way. Yeah.
I just want to say thank you so much for having invited me and for having me in a twirl for the past week, trying to say something coherent from the complexity that is which is the Irish sources. I hope it was coherent, and if not, then maybe you can, read the PowerPoints. And Max has just put up a couple of things there, and I don't adore people generally, but I serve my adoration for Max because of and my worship and all that kind of stuff from Max, because the work she is doing is so important, and especially with language, and she has been so helpful to me for so many years, and I hope for far into the future. And thank you, Luciana. We met many years ago. I can't remember where it was, but it was lovely to see you again, and thank you for the great work you are doing in Italy. Thank you. And for Jen and Letitia and Judith and Liliana, and for Diane, for all the work you are doing to keep these issues alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Mary.
Luciana.
Me too want to thank you, everybody. And perhaps to underline what is growing more and more clear for the Italian prehistory and for the values that we can find in these figures of powerful ladies. In Italy, we find a preeminence of the vegetal world. I can say that this is growing even more clear. And the function of the women as guardians, as the people who takes these, assumes on herself the care and the healing, and try to favor and to maintain that sense of connections that renders the web of life possible. And I think that this kind of value and vision is now necessary more than ever. And this is the message the ancestresses are bringing us, are offering us, wherever we are.
Thank you so much, Luciana. Thank you. I want to just also express gratitude for Diane, who unfortunately her internet went out today, which has never happened before on a salon. And so you defaulted to me. I was the backup. I want to thank Liliana and Judith for organizing the questions and for being ever vigilant and as an energetic support to make these things happen and participating. And for Jen, as she travels today, we wish her safe travels to her. She was popping in and out because she was on her way to the airport. So we look forward to having her back in the United States and to hear about her adventures. Mary and Luciana, your research, it's so vital and important to really anchor it to the earth and have it be a place where women can find wisdom, remembrance, and sanctuary to forge forward, to make this world a better place, to return again, yet again and again to the mother law or the realm of the ancestresses. So I want to thank you deeply. Now, all of you, thank you for spending time with us today. In 3 weeks, actually at the end of this month, we are going to be celebrating our fifth little conference, where we started these events every couple of weeks and every year. So we want to invite you back November the 29th, which is, our Black Friday, which is where everybody goes shopping. And of course, we want to resist the market economy. And we want to invite you back here. We'll be taking a 7-week vacation over winter to allow for us to breathe into the vision for next year. So our last event will be that mini conference. So we hope you will all come. We look forward to having a wonderful panel for you all, and we'll send you information as the confirmations come in. So until next time, everyone, wherever you are in the world, please take really good care of yourself. I know the elections in the United States have a ripple effect, but we come from a long line of resistance. And the night that I heard the news of, I woke up to in the middle of the night to check the polls. I had a moment of despair, and then I breathed, I listened, and in the middle of the night, I heard the critters, the animals outside, and I knew that life was continuing, and I was inspired to have my heart remain open, that my heart, the rebel heart, the heart of resistance, never forgets. And so we forge forward together, and with you all in this room with me today and who are viewing us here in the future. Thank you so much for all the good work that you do in this world, for making the world a better place. And may peace prevail on earth. Thank you, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Bye for now.
Thank you, Mary and Luciana.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.